In the landscape for the Acorn Fairy House, I'm going to have some large leaves, and I've included in the cutting guide templates for both a smaller leaf and a larger leaf. And I'm going to have, in my version, I'm going to have one larger one and two smaller ones. And the one of each has, this is a hole, there's a little plus sign marked for a 1/4 inch hole. These will stand on 1/4 inch dowels. And so for one large and one small, I will just punch a hole on one side, and then for the second small leaf, I'm going to punch a hole on both sides. So each of these leaves require 2 pieces of medium weight chipboard that's cut in the template shape, and then also a piece for the edge. This is also medium weight chipboard, and the dimensions are given there. And then we'll include a little box for the dowel to slip in, and I'm still determining how high those will be. That will be included in the final directions. So here I've got the pieces that I need for one of the small leaves. My 2 medium weight chipboards. This one is the one that only has one hole. I also have the template says a piece that is 5/8 inch by 7 inches long. And make sure when you cut the edge pieces that they are cut so that they are easily bendable like this. And then I've also cut a little piece for the dowel box, and we'll look at that in a minute. So in order to cut the edge piece, what I want to do is cut a diagonal across this piece of medium weight chipboard. And I'm just going to line up my craft knife on each corner and cut that diagonal. So here are the 2 diagonal pieces. And I want to line them up so that they, when you put them back to back, there's one edge that stays perpendicular. You'll know if you've got it right, because if you've got it wrong, it'll look more like this. You want one edge to be straight, and I would take a marker or something so that you know which way that's going, and mark it that way. Alright, so let's put those aside for a moment. And then I'll put in a call out what size box this little dowel holder ends up being. But no matter how tall it is, we're just going to make some little scores every 1/4 inch. Some deep scores so we can fold it on those scores, because I'm going to use a 1/4 inch dowel. If you're using a different size dowel, then you would adjust the size of this piece accordingly. So just every 1/4 inch. I'm getting a little slippage here, but it'll be alright. That way, otherwise you could cut little pieces that are 1/4 inch wide, but they are just a little bit too hard to handle. And then we'll just fold that around till we make a little box. And the inside of that will be a 1/4 inch. And then I've just got a piece of cardstock with some score tape on the back here. So when you form the box, make sure you just kiss these corners on the last corner and don't overlap, or else it will be too small for your dowel. If you have a piece of 1/4 inch dowel handy, just have a giant piece, but that will You know, it's even more advisable to just go ahead and form this around a piece of dowel, and then you'll know for a fact that your dowel will fit into this little holder. I've cut this piece of cardstock, oh, I would say I'd cut it a good 1 3/4 inches or so that it can wrap all around. So now we've got just like a little channel that the dowel can fit through. And if you have any overage from the cardstock, just go ahead and trim that off. So that little guy is going to go and be centered right on top of the hole that we punched here. And I'll just do that with a little bit of glue. And just let that set up a minute. So if you're working on one of the leaves that only has a hole in one side, for the next step you're going to start with the side that doesn't have a hole in it. And if it has a hole in both sides, it just doesn't matter, obviously, which side you start with. And I think I've cut my leaves pretty symmetrical, but they are going to eventually go one on top like this. So just make sure that you're working in a way that if your leaves aren't perfectly symmetrical, that they will end up going together. Now here, you remember I drew my little arrows, and what I'm going to do is take this strip, and in that direction, that arrow's pointing towards the straight side, I'm just giving it some help getting that curve started, and I'm going to glue it around on top of this outside edge on both sides. So that's what I'm going to accomplish next on both of them. And I would say work in sections. Do a little bit, let it set up, then come back and do another side. Once the glue has set up enough so you can work with this side, then run a bead of glue around the edges and put this one on top. And you'll have to flex it a little bit in order to make it fit, but it will fit, and it should be very nice and leaf shaped. So I'll do that next. So I think you can see that I've got some clamping action going on here to keep the leaf in the proper place till it dries. And in fact, I put this clothespin on the tip first and then work my edges around, and then just use some rubber bands around here, and we'll let that thoroughly dry. So then we'll be back. Here are my 3 leaves, and I have one large one and 2 small ones, as we discussed. One large one has a hole in one side. This small one has a hole in 2 sides, and this small one just has a hole in one side. Now, to prep them for the decorative paper, first I use the emery board, and then if necessary, some scissors to trim off any overlapping edges, trying to get these edges just as nice as possible. And then you can see on this one I've gone ahead and inked the edges all around. Now I think what I'm going to do is have the edge of the chipboard showing on the sides, and so I'm going to just cut my decorative paper for the sides the same way I cut the same dimensions as was used for the chipboard. Now if you wanted to use and cover up the chipboard edges, you could just take a spare strip of paper and put it into this crease here and measure all the way down here and see what that length is. Now your thickness should be about 1/8 of an inch at this end when you finish making your wedge, and you would just measure across here to see how tall to make the wedge at the other end. But like I said, I'm going to just do mine the same as I did the chipboard in each piece, so I can use the dimensions that are on the sheet from the cutting guide. So I'll do that with decorative paper, and then if you want to conserve decorative paper, you can only put it on the top side and just put some coordinating cardstock on the bottom. For these that only have one hole, the bottom is the side with the hole in it, and for this one that has holes in each side, you can just choose which side will be your top. I was planning for the top to be the flatter side, so that you might need to just stick it on a spare dowel, and when you put it on your dowel, see, okay, that it is perpendicular, the top is perpendicular to the stick this way, but this way it's a little slanted. You know, just decide which side is going to be your top. And finish those off with your decorative paper, and that's what I will do, and then I'll be back. Here are my 3 leaf shapes with decorative paper on them, and I've just on the bottom sides just put cardstock. I used a couple of different colors, and there's several green pattern papers in this paper line to choose from, or of course whatever paper you choose. I did trace around, as I said, to make the patterns for the top and the bottom, but then I cut in about 1/16 of an inch just to have a little reveal on those edges. So those are my 3 leaves. This big one and this small one with the 2-hole punch are going on one side of the house, and then this one is going to go on the other side. So there are those leaves done. And I've also now included another little template on this page I'm going to have some spiral steps that climb up on the giant, on the big leaves, and they'll be made out of, again, medium weight chipboard. I actually used a Sizzix Tim Holtz die from the Tattered Leaves, but in case you don't have that die, I've made a pattern that's about the same shape as that here. And any of these plus signs here indicate you should punch a 1/4 inch hole to use for the 1/4 inch dowel that we will use for the stem. When I used the die to make these leaves, I first covered some medium weight chipboard with patterned paper on one side and cardstock on the other, and then cut it out all in one step, and then punched the hole. I made about a dozen. I'm not sure how many I'll need. I'll update the video to say how many I used at the end. Here are my leaf stems this is the double leaf, and I have added all of the little small leaves that I'll spiral around here. They're not in their final position here. Right now I have, I think, 11 of the 12 on there, but I might experiment with that. This stem, for the tall one, I've cut 11 1/4. You wouldn't want to go any shorter than that. You might experiment to see what you like. It needs to be a certain height in order to be able to pull the lid off the Acorn house, depending, of course, where you want to have the leaves positioned. I'm going to have this top one kind of overlapping the lid. If you don't have it overlapping the lid, you can make as many leaves and go as tall as you want. And this one, I forgot how tall it was, 7 1/2 for the shorter stem. And so there are the 2 leaf stems that are ready to put in the project. I also used just some distress marker on the stems. You could paint them, do whatever you want. And when I get them in the final position of where I want all the little leaves and stuff, I will use some wet glue to get them permanently attached. And one other thing I did on the small leaf stem was I added a little swing. Now I just made this from one of the chipboard pieces that came in the paper line. I doubled it up with another piece of chipboard, added some of the tiny little screw eyes on here, and then just added some chain. Hopefully you can see how I did that. And just made it a length that worked in the project, and so that will add a little bit of interest to that leaf.